Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Experts Speak, must-see art of 2026. And we are delighted to go to Paris today, virtually, with Tere Arcq, who is the curator of a beautiful, beautiful show that I hope everyone will go see in the Musée du Luxembourg called Leonora Carrington. And Tere is the former chief curator of Museo d'Art Moderno in Mexico City and now independent curator. Tere, thank you for joining us so much.
Thank you, Mary. It's a
Yeah,
pleasure to be here.
I feel that we won't have enough time because I have so many questions about Carrington as a person and especially, of course, as an artist. If we just sort of cherry picked different vignettes from her life. Here she is as a debutante in London. Here she is fleeing the Nazis in France. Here she is escaping, I believe, involuntary confinement. I think it was in Portugal. Here she is as a mother in Mexico. Here she is at a prestigious exhibition in New York on I mean, it's 20 different lives in one lifetime. Yes, this is a radical, radical human being. Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's what the exhibition it's about because the underlying theme in the curatorial um, proposal is the journey.
Hmm.
Because all this traveling you mentioned, well, she grew up in England. She was as you said, she was in Florence, she was in Paris. In Florence, she was just a teenager. That's
Hmm.
when she did her first works that we know. Besides some children's notebooks, she started working on a watercolor series that's called The Sisters of the Moon. And in Florence, she was very interested by Renaissance, which will be a much later influence. So this is interesting because even though she's in one place, then the influence of that place is seen later in life. But all these journeys, then she goes back to England, then she meets, she goes to London to art school finally. That's what I'm talking about. This series she
Yes.
was doing, and this she was 14 years old, 13, 14, uh, about that time, and she's already showing this world full of women, powerful women, and symbols that will be persistent in her work, such as the horse that became her alter ego. So
Yes.
she geographically she moved from Lancashire, her hometown. Uh, she went to London to art school, and then went to France with Max Ernst, to Paris, and then the south of France. And so that's how she got engaged with surrealism. Then he was taken away during the war because he was German in French territory, and she had a breakdown. She ended up in Spain in an asylum, and she was able to escape out of the when she was leaving the asylum. The guardian of his father that was intending to take her to South Africa, and she managed to get to the Mexican embassy, and with the help of a Mexican working for the embassy, was able to leave for New York. So her life is then she came to Mexico, but also, and we will see in the work how those travels are influencing, but also her life was one very complex and continuous journey to understand the universe. And that's what we propose in the exhibition, these two ideas of the journey, the outside, the
Yeah.
real travels, and then the inner journey of Carrington.
The image that we were just seeing, and this is a testament to your curation, these are early, early works, as you said, that she did in Florence. And even that, from that very early age, her presence in Florence, her intention to study outside of England is a rebellion against her parents. Yes. What I'm getting at is I want to, for her, and we're putting this a label of surrealist on her. But for her, it is much, much more than an art movement, is it not? It is her, it's the way that she lives in the world. And by that, to me, I mean, she is iconoclastic, she is challenging things that are expected, these sorts of things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, but first of all, I want to say something because I think there's always uh, misunderstandings, perhaps when we talk about surrealism,
Ah,
because surrealism was much more than an art movement.
mm,
Surrealism was a philosophy of life.
mm,
And
mm,
that philosophy, it was about being rebellious, being radical, about going against the rules, about being interested in the unconscious, against the reason, and interest in magic, in the occult, in the esoterics, in the dreams. So, in a way, a lot of people that got involved with surrealism, it's because they had this affinity, such as Carrington. She already
mm,
had all that in her. She was a rebel since she was little. She was against the church. She was expelled from non-schools. She was interested in magic, in alchemy. So let's say that she found kin spirits and with among the surrealists.
mm.
And that's why there is not a specific style in surrealism as in terms of painting, for instance, as we have in cubism. And that's why many, many artists can sort of go into that label. I
Yeah,
mean, even today with the influence. So in a
yeah,
way, she was born a surrealist.
yes.
But it is true that surrealism gave her the opportunity to be part of an important historical time and movement where she met people that were very influential to her, even
Mm.
though later on she will sort of detach and find her own way.
Now, Tara, I would love it if you would help us see the paintings in the way that she intended. For example, let's look at this one. Um, she would not like it if I were to say, "Oh, well, what does the horse mean? What does the red dress mean?" You know, that there is a linear connection between parts of the painting and or symbols that she's using because she has preferred motifs that she goes back to again and again. Yes, we see animals, for example, frequently. There is not a one-to-one meaning for these that we can get to intellectually saying the horse means this. Tell us how she would like us to approach these paintings or how you approach them.
Well, that's a very difficult question because she never explained her paintings,
Yeah.
with perhaps with one exception that we have in a letter because it's a painting that went to a contest. But she thought it was up to the viewer to sort of try to feel and understand. And her paintings have multiple layers. Also, the more uh, uh, she advances in her maturity, uh, the more the layers and the more complex. Because we see, of course, paintings like this. Artist 101 is the address of the street in Mexico City where she first lived when she came from New York. So, in a way, there is a representation of a journey. We
Mhm.
see her, it's a self portrait even though it's fantastical. We know the horse, that she identified with the horse because she wrote about it. And she loved animals since she was a child. So there's always animals in the paintings. And here it might be easier to talk about what the painting is describing because it's very clear that she's living an old world that is falling apart. There was the war in Europe, and she's traveling to a new land where she will construct a new life, a new identity. So that could be a way to approach this painting in particular.
Mhm.
But there's influence of the fairy tales, but there's also the magic.
Right. Talk about that a little bit. And I she's often characterized as a woman surrealist, which I don't think she would like that either. She wants just to be an artist, not a woman artist. But we see some things here that some have called distinctly feminine in paintings like this. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Her role as
Well,
a woman artist.
you mean in the way that her paintings might be different than the ones that the
Exactly.
let's say male surrealists were.
Exactly.
Yes, that's a subject that I explored in depth with my colleague Eileen Ford at LACMA for an exhibition we did together in Wonderland uh,
Mhm.
12 years ago, 13 years ago, about the women surrealists that were exiled in Mexico and the US. And
Mhm.
exactly what we were looking at is how their paintings are different.
Mhm.
And one of the main things, and this relates to the painting we just saw, Artist 101, we were shocked by the huge amount of self-portraits that were much more symbolic. You see the traditional self-portrait of the artist in his studio. That's common for a male artist, although there are exceptions, of course. But we found that within all these women that were affiliated to surrealism, they used the self-portraits uh, to also discuss magical and to create beings that were much more powerful than just an artist sitting in his studio or her studio. And that's something that was radically different also. And maybe with this, I don't know if you want to present the painting of Feeding the Table, because also one of the differences is that many of the women artists, they were painting about what was like to be in a community of women and to be inside the house. And in the case of Carrington, something that's so this is the painting feeding a table. Actually, the cover of the catalog of the exhibition, and we have a whole section in the show that's called the Alchemical Kitchen. And the reason why we have this is this term was coined by Susan Abert, who wrote a fantastic book about Carrington that it's, I think, in the fourth, fifth edition, probably, or reprint. And in comparing what a lot of artists were doing, for instance, in the feminist movement, and we could maybe talk about Louise Bourgeois that were making paintings about the house as a prison. There was this idea that women were prisoners of the house, of the kitchen. And for Carrington and for other artists, and I can very specifically talk about, for instance, Remedios Varo, who was her very close friend in Mexico. For them, the kitchen was like an alchemical lab. That's where they could create, where it was the place of creation, not only cooking, also mixing pigments, discussing ideas, exchanging books. So for them, the house or the kitchen was not a place of oppression. Quite the contrary, it was the place for creativity. And sometimes she would even paint in the kitchen when she lived in a very, very small place. So that's why this idea of the alchemical kitchen and how Carrington compared the act of painting with alchemy, the transformation of the pigments. She even uh, worked with tempera, especially when she was pregnant and having children and was experiencing in her own body the idea of creation. She connected so much with the tempera technique. So it was an alchemy in her body, in her paintings, in her kitchen.
At one point, she says she has a baby in this arm and a paintbrush in this arm, in this hand, painting. I remember her saying that. So it's I don't know if that took place in the kitchen, but it's interesting that whole parallel with gestation and giving birth to a having it's a creative act. Yes.
Oh,
So
for her, maternity was something fantastic. It was not something she could see as a, you know, an obstacle for creation. Quite the contrary, it was a privilege to be able to give life.
yeah,
That for her, that connected with the goddesses in the past, the spiritual guides, the healers, the women as, the givers of life.
right. And they talk about her relationships, which were with other artists, other women artists in Mexico that were so important to her during this time. We have, as you mentioned, Remedios Varos and Gatihorna, and how they helped one another and supported one another.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
first of all, if we have to think about the context where they met. Uh, for instance, with Remedios Varo, they met in Paris briefly in a cafe. They actually didn't become friends until they met again in Mexico. And in Mexico, they were all escaping from war. They were exiles. They were poor. None of them have had any money. So they had to work sometimes on commissions, on whatever they could find to make a living. So they became very, very close, even living in community at some point when Carrington divorced Renato Leduc, the Mexican that she married to be able to escape war. She moved to the house where Remedios Varo was with Benjamin Perret. So the houses were also a refuge for whoever was coming or was in need, and they will help each other. And whoever could sell the painting, he will buy food for everybody. And so it was a very tight community, and they became like a family, especially with between Carrington Varo and Cathy Horna and their partners. They became very, very close. Katy, the photographer, is the one that introduced Leonora to Chiki Weiss, the photographer from Hungarian photographer that would become his husband and the father of her two sons. So they were very close, like a very big family, but also they had similar interests in what they were reading. They were interested. They used to go together, for instance, to the witches' market and find all these herbs. And they were interested in healing, but also in magic. And they would read all different kinds of books about developments in science, but also about mysticism, the evolution of consciousness. So it was a friendship around creativity, but also uh, to support each other in a difficult time.
I want to mention that this is a portrait of Leonora by Kati Horna. And so this is in the exhibition and part of this partnership, this friendship that they had. So that's a
Yes,
very
that
nice.
that was Kathy's birthday gift when Leonora
Uh,
turned 30 years old.
uh,
And she saw her as a woman of the Renaissance because she was like a total artist. She was not only a painter. She used all different techniques, but she was also working. She was a writer. She did tapestry. She did set design, costume design, a little bit of sculpture at that time. And so she did many things. She was pretty much a total artist.
well, that's part of, I think it may even be a subtitle, I'm not sure, of the exhibition, The Vitruvian Woman. No? Is
No,
that? Oh, okay.
it's not a subtitle, but it's something I write about in my
Okay.
essay. Mhm.
Okay. To that end, she's writing stories. She's involved in all kinds of creative output. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Especially the books. I've read a couple of the stories and that are um, parallel to what we're seeing in the painting. So it's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
It is there is a very strong relationship between her paintings and her writings, and also there's a relationship between her paintings and what she's reading. actually, and what she's interested in.
Uh,
But then she was she had the curiosity of a child, even in her 90s. She was always interested in everything, in learning about everything, in reading different things, and all this complexity of her view of life and her philosophy. Uh, we see them in the paintings. So
mhm.
you can sometimes read the painting through one lens, but then through another and through another, and it's like a never ending. You can always find new ways to approach her art.
Well, if we may, can we talk about one in particular and maybe perhaps do a deeper dive on one in particular? Uh, this one, which is called the Ballerina.
Ballerina.
Yeah.
Yeah, that painting is like a jewel.
Uh-huh.
Of course, you can see there's an influence of the Renaissance in terms, it looks like a religious icon
Exactly.
with the gold leaf on the background.
Yes.
But what's interesting, it's something that we will see a lot in her work, and it's these hybrid creatures, the mixture of human and animal.
Yeah.
And in the catalog, we reproduce one text that she wrote that exactly it's titled Female Human Animal. That's how she liked to describe herself.
Uh-huh.
And she believed in this idea that humans, animals, plants, everything has the same hierarchy. We are not superior in any way, sometimes even inferior. She will talk about how we are the only animals that kill not for survival reasons.
Yeah.
And and she really loved animals and care animals. She was uh, an avant-garde ecologist from very, very early on. And this painting also was made around the time when she was deeply involved with the teachings of Gurdjieff, this Armenian mystic that developed this system of practices that were focused on the evolution of consciousness, on trying to find a harmony between the physical, mental, emotional
Hmm.
aspects of a human being. And part of that were also the practice of different, they were called, they're still called because many people follow that school yet, movements, which were different dances that sometimes were meant, in the positions were meant to change the way we connect to the left and right brain, but
Uh-huh.
some of them also were meant to imitate the movement of the stars in the sky. So they were ways to connect ourselves with the earth on one side and then with what it's above. And also the use of gold is important in terms of her passion for alchemy. So
Yeah.
we see how one painting can have like multiple ways of approaching it, and I'm sure there's many more, but
Well,
just
just
some thoughts.
yeah, just visually, the glow of it is very, it pulls you in, of course. Yeah.
Hmm.
Talk, Tara, about, to me, it is a real stroke of luck, maybe more than that, that she ends up in Mexico after fleeing. She sees this one man who can make it possible for her to escape Europe when things are tumultuous. And then when it seems to me there is no more validating environment than Mexico for who she is. You talked before about surrealism being an entire movement, of course, not just in a form of art. And we have Andre Breton, he's writing the Manifesto of Surrealism, and he said Mexico is the most surreal place in the world. And so here she arrives. What effect does her arrival in Mexico have on her art practice, do you think? Do you think it's validating for her instincts as an artist? Talk about how Mexico influences her.
Well, in many ways. First of all, it was by chance. She did not really choose Mexico. Basically, when she married Renato, it was an arrangement because he really tried to help her get a visa and she couldn't. So he offered to marry her so they could leave Europe together to New York.
Mm,
He was assigned to a post in New York by the Mexican government. So they are in New York, they are around the surrealist. It was an extremely difficult period for Leonora because she had just left the psychiatric institution, the asylum. She was deeply affected. And that is something that you can really see in the paintings. That's one of the reasons why the exhibition begins chronologically, but then it goes thematically because we can see how her painting changes from one place to the other. So in
mm,
New York, there's a lot of distress. You can see the anguish and you can see uh, the nightmares. Even the color palette is much darker.
mm,
And then Renato is sent back to Mexico and she follows him.
mhm.
And it was very beautiful when we did the centennial show for Carrington that Renato's daughters found some love
Ah,
letters from Carrington. So
ah,
we realized that relationship that began as a favor, something arranged, it did turn out in a lot of care for each other.
mm,
And once in Mexico, Renato was super busy, never had time. And so they separated because she found a community. She really needed a family, friends, somebody. She was very afraid to be alone and have another crisis.
of
And she
course.
writes about that in the letters. So
Mhm,
finding this community of exiles, first of all, gave her a lot of support, emotional support as well, and then she was free. She was not afraid. She was super afraid of the Nazis. They were not here. She was free in a country that was not in war
mhm.
and in a country that she found fascinating.
Yeah.
All the diversity. She was so interested in cooking always, all the new flavors, new ingredients, going to the markets. Also, the idea that the magic that Breton talked about, it's part of a daily life,
Yeah.
that happens continuously.
Mhm.
So, of course, there were parts that she did not like in every place, but she found uh, many people that were fascinating to her and influence. And Laurette Sejourné, for instance, she was an anthropologist, an archaeologist, and she and Benjamin Peret, who was Remedios Varo's partner, was also very interested in archaeology. So that's how uh, all these ancestral cultures and what was happening in Mexico on the day to day and the magic started getting mixed in a way, but it's not evident in the work. She
Mhm.
didn't portray the market scene, for
No.
instance,
Right.
but she would do paintings about magic plants, for example, about peyote. And she, with the exception of a big mural on the Mayan cultures, she will take ideas of Quetzalcoatl, for instance, from Mesoamerica, but mix it with the juggler or the magician of the tarot card, and
Uh-huh.
then put them on a stage in
Uh-huh.
a fantastic play full of hybrid creatures. So there was always a syncretism, but definitely Mexico had a very, very important influence.
Can we place this painting in terms of what you were just sharing about this is from 1946. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, this painting is very important. First
Mhm.
of all, I am so happy that we have it in the show because this has only been exhibited once in 1948 at the Pierre Matisse Gallery and never been reproduced in color, never seen before. And it's a portrait of her gynecologist, who was also an exile from Spain. And Leonora didn't have a penny, and she went to see him when she was pregnant with her first child.
Uh,
And he took care of her. He even gave her money, not only didn't charge for the consultation, gave her a little money for medication because she had nothing. And later on, she painted this uh, to thank him, for he brought her two children to the world. And it's a very interesting painting because it's a portrait, but at the same time, she's talking about life,
Yes.
and
Y-
nature.
Yeah, it seems embryonic over there in the lower right. Yes. And
Absolutely.
yeah, Urbano Barnes, I think. Yeah.
Barnes.
Yeah. And so yeah,
There's also this landscape that it's reminds more of England. When she was pregnant, she was thinking a lot of her home and thinking about fairy tales and the landscape of her childhood. And she was also thinking about Renaissance and the painting of Renaissance. So this is also a key when we look at this painting.
yes, with the castle and yeah. The it's so interesting how you say it is such a syncretism, an alchemical process with even the objects that she's selecting to include in the images. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a beautiful one. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time because there is so much to apprehend about what she is doing, and I look forward to seeing this show in Paris at the Musée du Luxembourg. It starts on February 18th and runs until July 19th. Correct, Tara?
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
And thank you so much for putting it together so that we can all. It's one last question, if I may. It's so interesting because Carrington is a cultural icon in Mexico, yes, and
Mhm.
not as widely known, perhaps. I mean, that's changing, but was not as widely known, let's say, in the UK, which is her birthplace. It's interesting.
It is. It is in Mexico, even when she was alive and when she was young. Her exhibitions have always been really popular.
Yeah.
And I think things have been changing a lot.
Mhm.
Uh, it started changing when we did this exhibition in Wonderland at LACMA. All the press was surprised. Like, who are all these artists? Carrington Barrow, they never heard of. They knew about Frida Kahlo. That's
Yeah.
it. But it was a big discovery. The new shows started going. And I think also the Me Too movement was very important because a lot of museums started examining their collections and realizing they were missing a lot of women artists in
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
So there were many circumstances. Of course, the fact that the Venice Biennale was inspired, the Milk of Dreams was inspired by Carrington. And of course, museums have been acquiring her work, so her name is becoming more and more well known internationally. But I think mostly, and I must say this, I did not curate this show alone. It's with my colleague, co-curator Carlos Martin from Spain. We also did together the Carrington show in Madrid, and we really think she represents a lot of contemporary values. The way the world is right now, it's similar to what happens to them: war, exile, fascism,
Mhm.
totalitarianism, and of course, her interest in the occult that is now very strong, especially among the young people. Her views on ecology, on the idea of a feminism of consciousness. I think
Yes.
all these put together in a quadrant really helps to understand why she's becoming so popular
Yes.
nowadays.
Yes. Well, for all those reasons, we appreciate your putting this show together. It's going to be a powerful exhibition, and encourage everyone to go. And thank you so much for joining us. Yes.
Thank you. My
Thank you.
pleasure.